Identity access management, number one. Number two, zero trust. Then third is continuing to secure the human and to make our people the first line of defense when it comes to security.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Zero to Exit. This is Ankur and Elima. We're super excited to have with us Rinki Sethi on the show today. Rinki is the Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer at Twitter, where she's responsible for leading the efforts to protect Twitter's IT assets and advises the company's continued product innovation in the security space. Prior to Twitter, Rinki was the VP and CISO at Rubrik. Rinki has also been at the forefront of developing security practices at Fortune 500 companies like IBM, Palo Alto Networks, where Nilima and I are, Intuit, eBay, Walmart, and many others. In this episode, we want to talk to Rinki about current cybersecurity landscape and the top priority for CISOs. Hi, Rinki. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you and Nalima.
Yeah, it's so great to have you. And it's a busy season for CISOs always, but especially in the post pandemic world. So I am glad you're able to take some time to meet with us. I want to kick things off by just asking you, how did you get into security space?
Yeah, I have a fun story here. So I graduated from UC Davis with a computer science engineering degree at a very bad time in the economy. And I just got fortunate that I was recruited by Pacific Gas and Electric into a role that was called information protection analyst, which I later learned once I was in the job that that was cybersecurity. And so that was the start of my career. But my brain was wired as a security engineer or a hacker much earlier on. When I was in high school, I think I was in ninth or 10th grade, we used to use a chat agent called AOL Instant Messenger to talk to our friends. So I've discovered this thing and I thought it was awesome to be able to chat with my friends, not having to use the phone. Well, my dad discovered that we were doing that too. And he suspected that maybe I was talking to boys. So he put, which at the time was like parental spy tool, now known as a keylogger, onto my computer. And I overheard him one day talking to my mom about a private conversation that I had with my friend over AOL Instant Messenger. And so I immediately realized that he was somehow spying on me. I then went on my computer, found the spy tool, uninstalled it, and then he would go back and reinstall it. So then I wrote software to alert me every time he installs it so that I could uninstall it. I also gave that to my sister. And then we would go and chat about things purposely that had no meaning so that he would freak out. And so I think I was like wired as a hacker back then. And I later realized, wow, that might have been considered a security engineer back in the day.
Yeah, yeah, love that story. The good old days of AOL Instant Messenger. The kids nowadays don't know. We used to have group chats and Yahoo, IRC, all kinds of different ways to communicate. Obviously, the landscape has clearly changed. You were also at eBay during the early days, obviously. Any stories or any incidents from back in the days that come to mind in terms of a massive fraud or situations that you'd had to deal with?
It was interesting because they were really the start of this whole internet culture and the internet boom. And almost everything we saw, we still see in the industry in terms of attacks. We saw in the early days in eBay. And it was the first time that companies would hear about it was because it happened on eBay. But some of the interesting ones, we were spearphished very early on. This is how I got my job at eBay. We were spearphished really early on, where an attacker leveraged our VPN portal, mimicked the page, and did a spear phishing attack against eBay and got in. I remember that being a huge attack against eBay, and that's why I got the role over there, was to go and help them with the security culture and ensuring that they're prevented from spear phishing attacks. But we saw everything from like anonymous attacks to everything that you can imagine. Now it sounds kind of old, but back then those were kind of some sexy incidents that we had to deal with.
Yeah. We're still dealing with some of the same problems. It's just that the threat vectors have changed now, so many more ways to do it. But phishing, spear phishing is still probably the most one of the top three most popular way to get into the corporate assets.
You are at Twitter right now. You started with eBay, then you went to Intuit, then you've been to Palo Alto Networks. So very different kind of vertical companies. Why Twitter?
So I was the CISO at Rubrik. I had been there for just about a year and a half. I was so excited about Rubrik, helping take the company IPO. Still excited about Rubrik. I'm the biggest fan. And just when COVID hit, their IPO plan slowed down as it did for many companies. And that's what I had joined for, was to build a global organization, which I did. But when COVID hit, just because of the slowdown, I found myself having a lot more time on my hands. During the pandemic, I started making extravagant meals for the family, which was fun for a few months while it lasted. I think many of us did that. But I started really questioning, what is my life? What are my hobbies? I went through a little bit of an identity crisis, and I found out that I lost my passion a little bit. And so when I sat down and thought about it, I need to find something where I'm really challenged and where I get my fire and passion back, and where I feel like I'm impacting the world in some meaningful way. I started responding to the recruiting calls, and one of them happened to be Twitter. And Twitter had just faced a security breach, and they were preparing for the US election. That's what I was excited about, was to go and really join a place where the mission was to protect the public conversation. And it lit my fire, and I joined Twitter right behind the breach to help rescue them, and then to help them ensure that we had a safe election.
And as you've gone through different vertical companies, did you see different security problems at the forefront? For Palo Alto Networks, it might have been different versus Twitter, or is phishing the same problem for all organizations?
Yeah, there's a lot of similar themes company to company. When you look at the CISO agenda, you see a lot of common themes regardless of what company you are. Now, companies may go and decide to attack it in different ways. One thing that really did surprise me, though, when I joined Twitter, was we live everything that happens on the platform, the news that's out there, whether it's the US election that happened, or whether it was someone that dies, or even great news, it's amplified on Twitter. And as an employee, you live and breathe on the platform all day long. So then when you think about inside Twitter, everything that's happening on the platform, everything that's in the news, it's times 10, and it affects people personally. And when you're affected personally, emotionally, mentally, you're more likely to make mistakes, whether they're intentional or unintentional. And that leads to security gaps. And that is the biggest difference. That's unlike any environment that I've worked on. You don't see that in the prior companies that I've worked at, where the mental state and emotional state of people is affected in that way, where you really have to make sure that you're monitoring that insider use case.
Yeah. And especially for a company that's as public and as top of mind for the average person, everything gets magnified 100 times more versus probably a Rubrik or a Palo Alto Networks. I mean, breach is a breach, but when it's in media everywhere. One of the other things that I've obviously been in Twitter many years and followed Jack's trajectory and a very mission oriented company. How might this mission orientation manifest itself on your everyday job?
It's an amazing culture and an amazing company. And it's become something that no one could have imagined. Even in my conversations with Jack, it's never knew that this is what Twitter would become. It started off as an out of office messaging platform, and has become now something that serves the public conversation. I feel like the responsibility from a security perspective is huge, to not allow there to be gaps. We saw what happened with the security breach, making where very high profile celebrities and very high profile politicians, their accounts were impacted, and that can really sway things one way or the other. So the responsibility is at a different caliber than what I've ever had to do in the past. And each and every person in the security organization at Twitter feels that way. It's very different than previous companies I've been at. Security is always important, and security folks carry a lot of that burden and that feeling on their shoulders, but Twitter is a whole nother level.
Speaking of which, security is a priority, let's just say Twitter otherwise. But I mean, as you know, there's just so many things you can do in security. It's like applications and data and infrastructure, etc. As you look at the market landscape, the threat vectors, how do you prioritize what's most important? And then what are your top three priorities at the moment?
Yeah, I think at every company I've been at, it's you have to take a risk driven approach, to where
Yeah.
it's what are the biggest risks to the company. and how do I drive those risks down in a meaningful way? And then you have other things, so you'll say, here are my top 3 risks, and here are the projects we're going to go and execute on to drive down those risks, or here's alignment that we need to go and drive down those risks. And then you prioritize based on that. The interesting thing as I say that is, regardless of what company I've been at, and as I talk to many other CISOs out there, it's very similar, the CISO agenda as they come in, and so you hear the same type of priorities again and again. And a lot of what's happened during this pandemic has actually accelerated and made companies think differently about how they approach security as well, or accelerated a path that they were already on, or changed their mindset. Identity and access management continues to be super important and number one priority and on the agenda of every CISO at every company. And I can validate that with the last few companies that I've been at, that was number one priority. Then when you think about this new environment that we work in that is very hybrid, I saw acceleration of companies moving to cloud, including Twitter. Cloud security becomes important, but that's not the priority. The priority is really, how do you build a zero trust model? How do you approach that given a very complex hybrid environment where with your workforce everywhere, with cloud environments as well as bare metal, which we have a lot of at Twitter? Zero trust and building out that model and explain to folks that around the zero trust principle drives a whole set of programs on its own. And then I think third, so if identity access management, number one, number two, zero trust, then third is continuing to secure the human. And like I said, intentional or unintentional, people make mistakes. And how do you prevent either that from happening through technology's process? And how do you train the human as well? So continuing to make our people the first line of defense when it comes to security.
I'm so glad you said cloud security as your number two item. That is always encouraging to hear. And maybe after this podcast, I'd love to hear what kind of clouds do you have, and can Prisma Cloud help? I'm just kidding.
Will always hold a special place in my heart, Ankur.
I think this is, by the way, something consistently we've heard from other guests as well. I think identity, cloud, application, data. Now, if you really think about it, some of the recent things that we've seen with SolarWinds and Colonial Pipeline and Exchange breach, it would appear that the bad guys are always, and gals are always ahead of us. You on the practitioner side and us on the vendor side. What can the industry do to stay ahead of this so that we don't see this in the news, what appears to be like a weekly or monthly thing?
Yeah, it's really tough, right? Because it's easy for me to say in hindsight that these are the things that they should have gone and done. Sometimes this is what it takes for security to really be a top priority for the company. When you think about ransomware, ransomware has been around for a long time and there's
Yeah.
solutions for it. One is there's a lot of preventative capabilities you can put in place. But then on the flip side, if you're also looking at, okay, I have all my prevention in place, how do I ensure I have a detection and response strategy as well? Ensuring you have good backup recovery, ensuring that you have a plan and you've done tabletop exercises and you have a solid response plan, that you've partnered with the right industry vendors on solid backup solutions where your backups are immutable as well. Those are a lot of the things to think about. These aren't new concepts, right? These have been
Yeah.
around for a while, but unfortunately, until you see something like this, it validates that this is so important to have solid response plans for different critical scenarios that you might see within a company. Do you have the right preventative capabilities? Are you ready to respond to something like this? Do you have the right investments? And doing that with your exec team and board on a regular basis, I think, is extremely important. And just knowing that these are our top 10 use cases and we're going to regularly practice and see if we've got the strength and the muscle to do this.
You mentioned zero trust security. Can you define zero trust security for our listeners? When we talk to our customers, we hear very different challenges in implementing zero trust security. So, any insights around that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of companies they shy away from using the word zero trust because it has a negative connotation. But to me, you don't trust until you've earned the trust in whatever environment that you have. A lot of people think, "Oh, I'm going to go buy a zero trust technology, and that's going to solve everything for me." Zero trust is a mindset, right? And it starts with how you're thinking about it. It's a mindset that drives the security strategy and what technologies you decide to have, how you architect your network, how you architect your cloud environment, how you think about identity and access management as a whole. And that whole just thought process needs to be built in from everything. It's somewhat of a buzzword, but it's a true principle that needs to be followed. It's never trust, always verify, and along everything that you're building. Like I said, I companies that were already building that out really benefited, right? And I'm sure you've both seen this as well, that they really benefited when the pandemic hit because they were prepared to handle not relying on their own perimeter and perimeter security, but they had this model where they could leverage what they had already put in place. And I know I saw at the time cloud companies start shifting and accelerating investments in zero trust type technologies that can enable them to move in that direction. And so it's a mindset and a culture change within the company, and then it's all pieces of your security framework that you're changing to enable a zero trust mindset.
I have a quick follow up on that. We're starting to live more and more in a decentralized world, obviously with crypto and blockchain, and obviously with cloud. We're seeing a lot of developers having outsized influence on what gets brought in. Question I have for you is that in order for zero trust to be successful, you're going to need a whole bunch of decentralized people to have buy-in on this thing. How do you do that? Is it just a matter of just training everybody? Because the command and control stuff is just not going to work really, right?
It never has, right? The command and control never has. There, yeah, this is part of what I say. CISO's job, I would say, more than 50% of the time is spent in education and communication.
Yeah.
It's getting other executives and the leadership teams to be the champions behind this, making sure they understand what we're trying to do, them advocating for this, because it is a massive culture change that needs to happen. And so, yeah, it is decentralized, and how you're making decisions is decentralized. So I couldn't agree more. It cannot be command control. It's got to be kind of this culture change that happens. And people have to understand, why are we doing this?
Totally. I'm very excited about zero trust in general because I come from orchestration space and I really see people, process, and tools getting together because it's a implementation mindset rather than buying a tool mindset and trying to solve world hunger with that. That's how it's going to change things. You mentioned in one of your previous comments that CISOs have very defined agenda, and we know as a vendor, security space is incredibly busy. So, two-part questions. How do you think about vendor selection in general? Is it totally agenda driven, or some new shiny startup can come in and grab attention and get on the agenda?
It's interesting. I just tweeted about this yesterday, I think, and it went somewhat viral in the security community. I just there are so many vendors out there that we're inundated. And many times we're not sometimes it's not the CISO that you want to sell to. But if you do, I think a couple of things matter. And I do make the time. I think it's really important to be plugged into the startup community to see what new vendors are doing and what they're innovating and how they're disrupting or approaching a problem differently. The most frustrating part, and I can say this like 95% of the time when I meet with a vendor, it's buzzword bingo. Even when I give them, and there, I got a lot of advice on my tweet that only set your meetings for 30 minutes. But even when I set the meeting for 30 minutes, the first 15 to 20 minutes will be a PowerPoint slide with buzzword bingo. And it's just every single buzzword, next gen, data driven, AI, ML, and all of that, all the words. And I've started as a security engineer. I'm not saying I'm still deeply technical, but I understand the problems that security people are facing. Tell me what problem you're solving and tell me how you're solving it and how you're doing it differently from others. And that's what I care about. Vendors that do that well, I think will definitely make it to the top. A lot of CISO community is pretty tight, and we all talk to each other. And when vendors do that well, they get to the top of the list. CISOs become a fan, and they start recommending them to other CISOs. So that I think is really important. It's all about the people at the end of the day. There's teams of people, they are impressive, and you want to be able to trust the vendors that you're going to be working with. And I think that goes really far. And so when you get good vibes from the people in that company, you're going to give them more time of your day and even potentially partner with them, even though they may not have a complete solution.
Yeah. Yeah. You mean to say blockchain and AI and data driven next gen advanced security is not going to grab your attention? Yeah.
Definitely not.
Yeah, no, I can totally see it's gone viral with hundreds and hundreds of likes and retweets. Totally agree with you. Outside of the companies, obviously, you advise a lot of company. You're a board member at a lot of companies. Any startups, even in security or outside, doing some really cool work in any of your priorities or otherwise.
There's so many companies. I like, first of all, I'm really proud of Palo Alto Networks, and where I just seeing how, even from when I was there to how it's become a cybersecurity platform and how they're
Yeah,
solving every part of the stack and still remain to be a sexy company. I think in really leveraging kind of that zero trust and what happened during the pandemic, it's been amazing to watch. The other companies I think that are really interesting to me are companies that now are solving for security, but not going after the security team. They're solving for security and going after different organizations. Sneak has a really interesting model in how they're integrating with what engineers do. And
yeah.
engineers are saying that we'd like to go and partner. Rinki, can you help me fund this? And it's like, oh my gosh, now you're like speaking my language. I don't have to go around convincing we need something. They're trying to tell me we need this. And so I think that's a really interesting approach. I'm seeing a lot of success happening with security
Yeah.
vendors that are doing that. There's a very small group of security vendors that are starting to really say that maybe we go and approach different teams that have where security is just becoming like a burden, that how do we ease the pain and make it easier for them, but not really sell to the CISO, sell to the engineering teams instead. So I think that's a mindset shift that I've seen over the last maybe couple years, but it's really starting to emerge as an interesting way to solve for security without targeting the security organization.
Are you also hiring more engineering background security analysts than typical security analysts in your organization?
I have all kinds of people on my team with different backgrounds. We have a lot of security engineers that are working on threat management and security operations. They don't necessarily come from an engineering background, but the work that they're doing is to help us prevent and detect attacks or prevent incidents from happening. I also have folks that have no security background that are helping with security education and awareness and security culture change efforts, as well as architects. And I have people around the globe that are working on all different aspects of security, some on the engineering side, some on the risk management side. So a really strong mix of people. And I think, again, the pandemic has helped us realize that if we just look out of where our companies are headquartered, and we now have the opportunity to go and kind of hire from around the world and really build the organization in a way that represents our customer base.
I like you mentioned that obviously Sneak and other companies. I think part of the big movement with DevSecOps is that 30 million developers and 3 million security people. I think the only way to do zero trust, to train people, to coach your engineering teams, is to bring security where the developers are versus the other way around. Like if you ask the developers nowadays, hey, I'm going to run a code scanning tool and give you 300 pages worth of vulnerability. They're like, just go take a hike. I don't have time. I got to ship. But the idea, and I think Sneak is certainly doing something interesting in that area where bringing security to the left, I agree, is going to be a big sea change in the way we think about it. Even in that aspect, just a quick question: is security then becoming sort of more enabler? Do you see like the budgets are then going to the applications and engineering team and they just partner with security for consultative stuff? Like, is there a risk whereby, hey, the thing that the security practitioners have built over the years, their empire, like it's going to go away and now go to the application team? Is there sort of that talk going on among CISOs that all those budgets are going to the application team, or it's really a partnership type of conversation between the teams?
No, I still see it be a partnership. And do engineering teams even have a budget? Like I always see that they come to security because they see security as the ones that have the money bags. And
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
no, I see it as a really close partnership between the teams. I think they work together really well. I think when the need arises from a non-security team where Eng comes and says that I need help with something, it's such an amazing conversation to have, and the partnership grows because that's where security can pay for or provide services or build services for the engineering team. So I see a lot more of engineering teams coming and saying, security, we need you to build this service for us, or we'd like to go buy this service and have you help us in evaluating what would be best and help us integrating and so forth. And this is when security is a good partner. They come to security and they say, we need a couple more of your people to be embedded in our team and work with us on a day-to-day basis. And gosh, that that's the place a security team wants to be in. Whereas if you're running a code scanning tool, and like you said, Uncle, you're bringing a 300 page, here's all the things you need to go fix. They're just going to bypass. They're not even going to look at it, and then you're going to have security holes. I think that partnership piece is key in how you move forward.
Yeah, we're just to sort of wrap up on this because this is obviously a hot topic as well. I think you're spot on. Like I think the sort of the equilibrium is basically, when there are security risks like with your code and vulnerability, shift it left, let applications team take care of it. But when you have advanced threat like ransomware or I don't know, crypto mining, which by the way is picked up quite a bit, just giving you a heads up, keep an eye on that. We're seeing quite a bit of that. I mean, the applications teams are not armed to handle those things. You need security people, SOC people to be actually managing that. So it's gonna be a close partnership between the two, and I think that's good for the industry.
Where does IT play in this mix, in your
They
opinion?
just cough up the dollars.
Yeah, the thankless jobs, right? When something's broken, you hear everybody complaining, but when everything's working, it's kind of in silence. No, IT's a really close partner. So when you think about, like, on the engineering side, obviously securing development practices and that kind of thing. On the IT side, helping them make sure there's no shadow IT, helping them working together on endpoint security, working together on SaaS security. A lot of IT now is managing hundreds and hundreds of SaaS applications. And how do you make sure those are secured in the right way? How do you make sure endpoints are secured in the right way? I mentioned ransomware. And so, like, ensuring that you're really have the right controls on your endpoints as well. So I think IT and security are very, very close partners and work together. And in some cases, security owns IT. In some cases, IT owns security. So I've seen different models emerge. I've got my opinions on my favorite ones, but you see them in any case, they have to work really closely together.
Would you share one of those opinions?
Yeah, I like seeing IT under security, and I've seen more and more of
Mhm.
that emerging. Traditionally, you see CIOs where security reports into IT, and I think what happens in that scenario is that you have a lot of conflict of interest on where are you going to put the dollars. Are you going to put it in enablement and availability, or are you going to put it in security? Whereas in the other way around, which if you think about IT these days, especially in modern companies, a lot of it's SaaS. And so if that's the case, then the other piece of it is endpoints. And then what is it about endpoints? It's mostly security. It's how are you hardening the endpoints? So having that as a part of security will help the security posture overall. And I think you apply a different lens in how traditional IT has been run. So that's my more favorite model. And I've seen some of that emerge where CISOs now have the responsibility of IT.
Yeah, great perspective. Never heard that before. Yeah, well
Yes.
said.
Well, I think the developers are going to change the security and IT in a similar manner. It's a great perspective. With that, Rinki, we want to talk about your career. You've had a lot of success in your career. Any advice on things you did particularly to get where you are? And you're welcome to share any stories.
I think one interesting thing, and I was talking to somebody about this recently, if I had listened to my mom, I would have still been working at PG&E because I would have gotten a pension and I would have never left because, the advice I got when I was ready to leave PG&E was you have a pension, you have a good job, people aren't getting jobs. And so why would you even consider leaving? You should just stay there. And so one of the things that's helped me a lot in my career is I have taken risks and I've made changes. Some of those have been really good changes, some of those have been mistakes, but I've made changes and I've learned from every single one of those changes, whether it's entering a different company or a different industry completely or taking on a different role within the security space. That has done me a lot of good. And I think it's interesting because I was even mentoring somebody recently who was like the company was going through so many changes. She had been there for a while and she was waiting for that promotion and a leader left and then it was like a reset button and it was like, well, if you love your company and you love where you're at, then definitely stick it out. But if that's important, it's not always a bad thing to go look and make a change. In fact, it can add to your portfolio. And for me, it's really helped make me well-rounded. So like to me, I think taking risks has always helped. And sometimes that lands in really good places. Sometimes you make mistakes, and I think that's when you learn the most. And so I know I've shifted. I went from PG&E to Walmart.com. Best One of the best moves that I made. I think that's where I found an amazing peer that was a mentor of mine who took me under his wings and actually taught me everything there was to know about cybersecurity and made me a true security engineer. And then Walmart to eBay, again, a complete role change, as a security engineer to somebody who was driving culture change. And then I like fast forward into my career. Just recently, before I became the CISO of Rubrik, I made a career mistake. I joined IBM. And actually, that was right after Palo Alto Networks. A lot of my mentors at Palo Alto Networks, a lot of the executives were like, Rinki, I don't think that's the right place for you to go, just knowing you. And I was like, well, no, I think I'm different and I'm going to make the change over there. And sure enough, I learned my lesson. And 6 months later, I pulled out and found a different role. And I don't
Right.
suggest that anybody listening to me right now go and, leave companies after 6 months. That's not a good thing to do, but it was a mistake that I recognized quickly. And so I think I've had those, it's been a very interesting career journey. Never would I have thought when I started as a security engineer that I would be a CISO. I had not known a single female CISO. I don't even think I knew what a CISO was back then. And so not heard the term. It's now a very common term. It wasn't back then. So been an interesting ride for sure.
You mentioned mentors, and actually, I just saw recently you gave a shout out to, I think it's Mark Anderson, about mentorship. How important is the role of a mentor, and how can somebody find one? And by the way, honestly, personally speaking, I wish I had one when I was in 20s as well. It's one of the best advices, but I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, both Mark Anderson, Mark McLaughlin. I mean, they're my mentors. In fact, one of them also were the ones that advised me not to go to IBM. One of the interesting things is like none of us have seen any success on our own. It's just that's a fact. People help you along the way, whether it's a peer of yours or somebody who works for you can even be a mentor. You find mentors in interesting ways. My main thing has been, and I think a lot of people are like, I don't know if I can go ask this person for help or ask them a question. And I haven't shied away. Like, I think asking for help is a really good thing. And I do go and ask people for help all the time. I have a very specific question. I know why they might be the ones with that expertise that can help me. And I go and ask. And I expect people to do the same to me. And I think like we have an obligation in the industry to go and give back and help others and help them rise and mentor folks. And I spend a lot of time doing that. And that's because I've been fortunate that a lot of people have helped me as well. But I would say the biggest thing is ask. Folks shy
Yeah,
away from asking people. And it's not necessarily like go to the CEO of a company or a CISO, like understand
yeah.
what it is that you're looking for and who might be the right person to ask for the advice that you need, right? And I think that's the most important piece. Sometimes I even go to my old employees to ask them about something because that's the help I need at that point in time. So mentorship comes in its various forms.
For you, I know you're big on mental health and well-being. What are some of the hacks you've developed over the years to keep your mind and body sane and mentally fit?
Exercise has helped me tremendously. I spend an hour and a half every morning doing my exercise routine. I right now I am glued to the Peloton. It has saved my life during this pandemic to be on the bike and the Peloton tread. And so I don't get anything from Peloton for saying that, but it's just the truth. It keeps my mind and body healthy. It's kind of my stress relief, if you will. So that's been a really important thing. I think like people don't realize that when you keep your body and mind healthy, like anxieties reduce, you just feel better. Mental health is like a very important topic to me. Mental illness is run throughout my family. I have had to deal with it in a very close way during this pandemic. And I think in the cybersecurity industry, we suffer from it the most because it's what makes us good at what we do is that level of paranoia and that level of anxiety and that level of stress of what might I not be thinking about that could happen at any given time. And so I think it's really important to find good ways to relieve that stress, whether it's exercise or even talking to someone or any of that.
Do you are you into meditation? And if
I
so, do you
am.
have a favorite app or something?
Yeah, I use Headspace. I also use the Peloton app quite a bit. They have some good meditation. I've done some meditation camps in the past, Vipassana, and so I still have some of the practices that came from that. And so I do, and I have to keep reminding myself too that I need to make more time for meditation.
With that, Rinki, we'll go into the rapid fire. Are you ready?
I think so.
So Ankur and I will probably alternate, but basically, I know you love to travel. What's your favorite travel destination outside of COVID time?
Oh my gosh, that is the easiest question ever. The Maldives. I think like it's the most amazing. I've like when I saw pictures of it, it looked amazing. But when I saw it, I didn't think I could ever see it in my life some place like that. So definitely the Maldives.
Yeah.
Oh, half the Bollywood lives in Maldives, by the way. So, did you ever see any Bollywood people there?
I have not seen any Bollywood people. I've only been there once, and I look forward after this pandemic is over to take my family over there. So I'm looking forward to splurging on that next vacation.
Yeah, Nilima, just so that you know, the people in Maldives, some of them just say, "Oh, I just saw the Twitter CISO a few
Yeah.
weeks ago." um,
Totally.
I know you're a huge Warriors fan, so am I. So I got to ask you. So it looks like Jokic is going to become the MVP. Is the right pick, or should it have been Steph?
Oh, I love Steph. I love Steph. It should have been Steph.
Yeah, 100% agree. Maybe next year. I think his best years are ahead of him. And just a quick follow up: who are you betting on winning it all in NBA?
Oh my gosh, I don't even know. I have no idea. Who are you betting on?
Right now, look, I'm not betting on anybody. I'm rooting for Suns. Like I want Chris Paul to get one ring. I've been a huge fan since the early days. So, but they're really good. So Suns, yeah.
Yeah, I like as soon as the Warriors were out, I stopped watching basketball. I was like, this is I'm so sad.
Okay, next one. Which book has had the biggest impact on you?
I think Sapiens was a really good one for me. I think I refer back to a lot of the facts, or I feel like every time I think of a situation, I can refer to something that was talked about in that book and just how like we as human beings are, and like I keep referring back to that book. I thought it was like just going back to the fundamentals of what brought us here. Explains a lot in like where we're going and who we are today. So I found that book to be fascinating.
Yeah, it should be part of the high school curriculum. They should replace all the other history book and just replace it with Sapiens. Yeah.
Yes, 100% agree.
Multitasking or focused work on a single thing?
I'm a multitasker, but I like my focus time. But yeah, and you know what's funny? I don't know about all of you, but I'm trying to be better at it, I swear, but it annoys me so much when you're in a meeting and you see someone typing on Slack and I'm like, "Stop multitasking. Like, can we just focus?" So I think I have appreciation more for now focus time and not multitasking. But I tend to lean like I'll automatically multitask. I think I've always been like that, and then when you become a parent, I feel like that just you kind of have to. And I have a lot of appreciation now for focus time and appreciation for people that can focus too.
Last question. Who should we invite next on the pod? Thank you.
I would love to hear Jason Chan from Netflix, the
Mhm.
CISO there.
Yeah.
He just posted on LinkedIn that he's retiring and finding his backfill role, and I found that fascinating. I would love to hear about his journey at 10 years there. What is he going and following him and what he's going to do next.
That wraps up this episode of Zero to Exit. Rinki, it's been a pleasure to have you on the pod. We appreciate you taking the time and the insights. Best wishes as you help Twitter reach new heights with privacy and security.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you
you,
so much
Ricky.
for having me again. Yeah, thank you.